Hi, I'm Margaret Alexander. For those of you who don't know me, I'm a rising senior majoring in classics.
And I'm Andrew Wright. I'm a rising junior, and I'm pursuing a classics minor.
And this is our presentation on the Verge of Vendetta, exploring a medieval Latin tale through new media. And because we're a little old-fashioned, as you would see in an old movie, we're going to start with the credits with something called a responsibility statement that we would use for encoding purposes. So first, we have our original author, Albertano de Brescia, who wrote this story in 1246. We have our 1873 critical edition by Thor Sundby, that's the name. And in 2000, Angus Graham, another scholar, transcribed this story into a searchable Word document. And then Professor Vise, back there, she picked up this story in this project. And so now we are digitizing it and translating it. I'm working on the digitization this summer. Last year I did more translation, which is what Andrew is doing this summer. And we had help from our friend Ben Hess, who graduated just this spring. So now Andrew is going to tell you more about the story itself.
Yeah, so Albertanus wrote our text. It's titled On Constellation and Council. He wrote it in the mid-13th century, and he lived in Brescia, which is a city in northern Italy in the Lombardy region, where he worked as a notary and a causticus, which is like sort of a legal consultant. And so just for some historical context, in northern Italy at the time, I'm sure most people know about like the term vendetta and what it means. Basically, it can be defined as like a blood feud between two families where they sort of seek out like retaliatory, vengeful acts against one another for like previous aggressions. And so just about northern Italy, it's like specifically, there was this sort of alliance called the Lombard League, which was various cities in the area who had sort of bound together to sort of oppose aggressions made by the Holy Roman Empire, which was sort of opposing the Catholic Church at the time. And the impact of our story, a while later, it was adopted by Chaucer into one of his Canterbury Tales, which is pretty cool. So just briefly, the plot, the main male character, Melibes, he leaves his house one day to go for a walk, and his neighbors, who he describes as age-old rivals, they break into his house, beat up both his wife and his daughter, and like the story follows his wife, Prudentia, trying to convince him to not pursue vendetta. And it's like a conversation about morals, and she extensively uses quotes. Well, Melibes and Prudentia both extensively use quotes from biblical and classical sources, so it really ties in a discussion of morals from spanning various generations.
And it's wonderful because of our connection to classics, which is how we got into this project.
Yeah. Albertanus describes the purpose of the story was to provide emotional and spiritual sort of cures for his son Giovanni. And this, just briefly, it shows our sort of two-step translation process. Obviously on the left, you see the original Latin. We first translate it into like a rough literal English, but it's not exactly like how we would read it today. So then later on we'll go through and translate it into the pretty English. And just a quick note, so obviously if you've ever taken like a Latin class either here in high school, you've most likely learned classical Latin. Well, the interesting thing about our text is obviously from the time period it's medieval Latin, which is sort of medieval Latin. At this time it had really no spoken form. It was just written down, and at this time it's not that different, but you definitely notice some differences between medieval Latin and classical Latin, which is something that's significant for like our learning process. Yeah.
So now that we've talked about the translation process, I'm going to try and give you a rundown of the digitization process. So we weren't working from original manuscripts. We were working first from a critical edition, the 1873 one, that it collated 15 different manuscripts. And originally we were working from a negative of a microfilm, but thank goodness for modern technology, this book has been digitized by Google, which made it so much easier. And so then when Angus Graham picks up this story in 2000 and transcribes it, as you can imagine, there are a lot of errors, just a lot of human errors in the transcription, whether he omitted an entire phrase, or he just misspelt something. As you can see, the gratia, that's our first correction. There are about probably like 60 discrepancies between Sunby and Graham. And then now what do we do that we fix these? How are we going to put it on the web? Well, we're using an XML language called TEI. For those of you who had any experience in web development, you have HTML, which is hypertext markup language, but then XML, extensible markup language, is a close cousin of the HTML, and we're more concerned with the structure of the text rather than how we're going to format it, because that can all be done later after the fact. And for as much as I poured through, I realized that they are more of a guideline than actual rules. You're able to adapt as your store needs, which is hard for someone like me who likes specific decisions on how to do something. So from here, then we upload it to Visual Studio Code. That's the software we use. We get something that looks like that, and after about, I don't know, probably like 4,500 lines of code later, and copying and pasting and marking it up, which, yes, before someone asks me in the Q&A, I can't wait until AI can do this. You have something, you just have raw, or, well, actually, no, we will talk about this real quick. So go to the next slide. Real quick, I'll just show you a breakdown of what different elements. So we have, I don't know how well you guys can see this, but in the dark blue, we have our elements or tags, and then we have our attributes in the light blue, and then the values assigned to those attributes. So it's pretty simple, but the thing to point out here, from 1873 to 2000, we have two different formatting decisions. The first, this all capital letter, title, and then all lowercase, besides the first word, italicized. Super boring, but bear with me. The point I'm trying to get across is that to our human brains, we understand the reason when we see something italicized, whether it's a book title or whether it's for emphasis. We understand these reasons, but through TEI, we put the why. Why is it that way? And so the keyword today is metadata. That's why we're using extensible markup language rather than HTML to encode all the different parts. So then after the 4,500 lines of code, we get some raw text. And sorry, I forgot to add this slide. That's just more so you can compare. Again, take 3. We have raw text, and what do we do with this? Well, we use something called citation, which coders, they have to make the most complex names for their language. That is citation, that's how you say that. And it's a JavaScript library that allows you to display XML on a web browser without first converting it to HTML. And so from here, we can get a website. This was our wireframe by Nyangi Borthwick last year. And then this is our current website. And as you can see, it looks very nice, very preliminary. None of this really works yet, but we'll be able to look at just the Latin, just the English, or look at the XML file for those who want to access it, who want to know the real nerdy points of this. And then, if we go to the next slide, the great thing is that we can interact with the text in new ways. So here we see Latin and English, and when you're going to click on a quote, it's going to tell you where it's from, and both sides are going to be highlighted to show that, and that way the nuances in translation you can really see are very clear. And so we get to this point of there's merits in putting this online, but why do we go through all the trouble? Why do we not use HTML? Like I said, we care about the metadata. And using this quote, it's my favorite quote probably from the whole thing. She says, "I'm not Prudence," that's her name, but she's not Prudence, lowercase p, but the words of Prudence. And this is very true when we run it through text analysis Voyant, and we see that Dixit is the most commonly used word in this whole text. That isn't just the dialogue between the characters, but when she's quoting people. And so now with the TEI, we can do something really interesting. We can mark up, so here's a quote by Seneca, we tag that as classical, and then if we see our pie chart, I have gone through and given each of the tags color, so you can see classical or blue there. And then right here we see this is a passage when she's telling Meliboeus to not be grieving or have time to grieve, right? Like she's citing Seneca. It's very stoic that, it's one thing to grieve for a friend when they die, but you should get over it and get a new friend. And so as you can see, a lot of her text is quoting other people. It's right here, it's about 46% of the speech. So we just get new insights into how it works. And this crazy thing, this is my brainchild. This is a glimpse into Albertano's brain. Because this is all of the quotes, we had the pie chart, right? But this is all of the quotes in sequential order, 559 thin stripes. And for those of you who were here last year, yes, I did update it. You can tell by that blue stripe right there. I updated it from last year. And I don't know, this may just look crazy, but I think it's kind of fun. We can see that he's relatively consistent with what he cites. We're going to see the chapter breakdown on what he cites on what topic. If on pride, he's citing like the Old Testament, things like that, especially the commentary on the role of women. And let's see, from here I have this quote: "The Book of Consolation, though largely woven from the sayings of different authors, by no means deserves the name of a mere patchwork." And some scholars, they kind of make fun of this story because it really just is all of these quotes mashed into this text. If you were to take out all the dialogue, there's not much narrative. She goes on chapters, don't pursue Vendetta, he says, okay, the story ends. But when we see how artfully these different sources are woven together, then I think that reveals a very different story. And so here we see all the different formats, we see the different hands it's gone through, and we're very happy to be part of this project. So, do you have anything to add?
Yeah, that's all. Thank you guys.
All right.